Then you must be my answer." He said it low, a rifle still between them, and something in Anna Bennett's ruined heart turned over. "Careful, cowboy," she whispered, though her voice shook. The last man who called me his answer watched Evelyn Crow burn my name to ash and never said a word. My father's 4 weeks in the ground, and his dying wish was that a stranger might take me in. So don't you smile at me under those stars like I'm something worth keeping. Ethan Cole lowered the rifle and his eyes never left hers. "Ma'am, your daddy trusted me with the one thing he loved. I'd sooner lose this whole ranch than prove him wrong." If you're watching, subscribe and follow this story to the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. The rifle didn't lower for a long time. Anna kept her hands out where he could see them, one still clutching the letter, the other trembling from cold or exhaustion or fear she'd stopped being able to tell the difference somewhere back on the road. "Say it again," Ethan said. "My father said you needed a wife." She swallowed. "Thomas Bennett. He said if everything fell apart, I should come to you, to Ethan Cole." The name landed on him like a slap. She watched it move across his face, watched something old and buried come up for air and get shoved back down. "Thomas Bennett is dead." "I know," Anna said. "I buried him 11 days ago." The rifle came down. "Not all the way, just enough. You walked here. The last 6 miles. From where? From wherever the stage stopped taking my money." A short, brittle laugh escaped her. "Which was about the same time everyone else stopped too." Ethan looked at her for another second. Then he stepped back from the doorway. Not an invitation exactly, more a decision he seemed to resent making. "Come in before you freeze on my porch and give the town one more thing to say about me." She didn't sit until he told her to. He set a plate in front of her, bread, cold beef, a wedge of hard cheese, and she stared at it like she'd forgotten what food was for. "Eat," he said. "I can pay you." "With what?" She had no answer. He'd known she had no answer before he asked. He set down a cup of coffee and pulled a chair to the far side of the table, keeping distance between them like a man used to distance. "Eat," he said again. "Then you'll tell me what really happened. All of it. Not the version you rehearsed on the road." Anna's hand froze halfway to the bread. "How do you know I rehearsed it?" "Because everybody who shows up at my door in the dark has a story they've been practicing. Nobody comes to Ethan Cole by accident." He said his own name like it tasted bad. She ate. She hadn't meant to fall on the food the way she did, but her body took over and she was ashamed of it. And she saw him look away to spare her, which somehow made it worse because she hadn't expected kindness and didn't know where to put it. When she finished, she folded her hands and made herself meet his eyes. "My father was a good man," she said. "I know what your father was. You knew him." Ethan turned the coffee cup a slow half circle on the table. 15 years ago, your father was the only man in Wolf Creek who'd shake my hand in public. After the thing they say I did. He didn't believe it. He never said so out loud, but he'd cross the street to meet me instead of the other way, and in a town like this, that's louder than a speech." He stopped turning the cup. "I owe Thomas Bennett more than I can pay. So if he sent you, then his debt is mine now. That's the only reason you're sitting at my table and not out in the cold. Understand that. It's got nothing to do with a wife." Anna nodded slowly. "He wrote it, though, in the letter. He said marriage." "Show me." She slid it across the table. Ethan read it twice. She knew because she watched his eyes go back to the top and start again, and she watched his jaw tighten in the same place both times on the same line. When he set it down, his voice had changed. He knew he was dying when he wrote this. Yes, he was scared, not for himself, for you. Ethan tapped one word on the page without looking up. He uses the word protection. Twice. A man doesn't ask a scarred rancher to marry his daughter for protection, unless he thinks his daughter is going to need protecting from something specific. He finally looked at her. "So what is it, Anna Bennett? What did you do?" Nothing. The word came out sharp, and she hated how much it sounded like a lie, even though it was the truth. I didn't do anything. That's not what I asked. I asked what happened. Anna pressed her hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. I was a bookkeeper, she said. A good one. The best in Wolf Creek. Everyone said so back when everyone would say anything kind about me at all. I kept the books for 4 different businesses. And 8 months ago, I kept the books for Evelyn Crow. Something shifted in the room. Ethan went very still. Say that name again, he said quietly. Evelyn Crow. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at nothing. You know her, Anna said. Everybody in this territory knows Evelyn Crow. Half of them owe her money. The other half work for someone who does. He didn't turn around. Keep talking. Anna took a breath. I worked in her office for 3 months. I balanced her ledgers, her vendor accounts, her payroll. And about 6 weeks in, I found something. What? Numbers that didn't add up. Payments going out to companies I couldn't find. Vendors with names but no wagons, no deliveries, no goods. Money leaving her accounts and going somewhere. I didn't understand it at first. I thought it was my mistake. Her voice dropped. Then I understood it wasn't a mistake at all. It was a system. And I'd found it. Ethan turned around slowly. What did you do with what you found? Nothing, Anna said. That's the part nobody believes. I did nothing. I was afraid. I didn't say a word to anyone. I thought if I just kept my head down and finished the quarter, I could quit quietly and never look back. She laughed, and it broke in the middle. But she saw me see it. I don't know how. One look, one hesitation over the wrong page, she saw it in my face. And 3 days later, $40 went missing from her strongbox. $40 you never touched. $40 I never touched. But my name was on the ledger for it. My handwriting copied, forged, I don't know, but it was mine as far as any sheriff could tell. And Evelyn Crow stood in the middle of the mercantile in front of the whole town and said I trusted that girl, and she robbed me. Anna's eyes were dry now, past crying worn smooth. That's all it took. One sentence. From her. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. They didn't arrest you, he said. No, she made sure of that too. An arrest means a trial, and a trial means I get to talk. Anna's mouth twisted. She didn't want me to talk. She wanted me ruined, which is different. An arrest ends. Ruin doesn't. She let the story run instead of the law, and the story does her work for free day after day in every shop I can't buy from, and every door that won't open, and every man who won't look at me. She lifted her chin. So now you know what I did, Ethan Cole. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. That's my whole crime. The silence stretched between them. Then Ethan said the thing she hadn't expected. I believe you. Anna blinked. You don't even know me. No, but I know her. And I know what it looks like to be a story a town tells instead of a person. His voice was flat and certain. I've been the story for 15 years. So yeah, I believe you. For the first time since her father died, Anna felt something loosen in her chest and immediately distrusted it. Don't be kind to me, she said. I can't afford to owe anybody, not even you. I'm not being kind. Ethan sat back down across from her. I'm being careful, because your father didn't send you here to hide Anna. He sent you here because he was afraid Evelyn Crow wasn't finished, and your father was rarely wrong. That night, he made up the small room off the kitchen, and she lay awake in it staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind work at the roof. She'd told him everything, almost. She hadn't told him the last part, the part she hadn't dared write in any letter or say out loud on any road. That the day before she'd found the forged ledger, her father had come to see Evelyn Crow himself, quietly, privately, and that he'd come home gray-faced and shaking and told Anna only one thing. Whatever you found in that woman's books, you tell no one you found it. Not a soul. Do you understand me? Not even me. He'd died 4 weeks later. The doctor called it his heart. Anna had stopped believing in his heart the moment she read his letter. She turned toward the wall and shut her eyes and did not sleep. Sob. In the morning, Ethan was already gone to the fields. He'd left coffee on the stove and a note on the table in blocky, careful handwriting. Eat. Don't answer the door. She ate. She did not, when it came to it, obey the second instruction. Because at 10 o'clock a wagon came up the road, and a man in a good coat climbed down and knocked, and when Anna cracked the door, he already knew her name. Miss Bennet. He removed his hat with a smile that never reached his eyes. Francis Doyle. I manage the bank in Wolf Creek. I wonder if I might have a word with Mr. Cole. He's in the fields. Ah. Doyle's smile didn't move. Then perhaps you can pass along a message. Purely a courtesy. Mr. Cole's note comes due at the end of the season, and well. He glanced past her into the house, and his eyes did a small deliberate tour of the room and came back to her face. The bank has become aware of certain irregularities in Mr. Cole's situation. A woman living here, unmarried. It raises questions about the household's stability, its suitability as a risk. Anna's blood went cold. You came all the way out here to tell him that. I came all the way out here as a friend. Doyle put his hat back on. The bank would hate to have to move early on the note. Foreclosure is such an ugly business. So much easier when everyone cooperates. You understand. He tipped the hat. Do give Mr. Cole my regards, and Miss Bennet. He paused at the wagon. Wolf Creek is a small town. What's between these walls doesn't stay between these walls. It never does. He drove off. Anna shut the door and put her back against it and breathed. They already knew. She'd been in this house for one night, and Evelyn Crow already knew. Ethan came in at dusk, saw her face, and set down his tools very slowly. Who came? How do you know someone came? Because you're standing in the middle of the room like the floor might open. Who? Francis Doyle, from the bank. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something behind it went hard as iron. What did he say? Anna told him. All of it. The irregularities, the stability, the woman living here unmarried, the note coming due early, the purely a courtesy. Ethan listened without moving, and when she finished, he walked to the window and looked out at the dark, and stood there a long, long time. She moves fast, he said finally. You think this is her. I don't think anything. Doyle doesn't clear his throat without asking Evelyn Crow's permission first. The bank's been in her pocket for years. He turned. The note's real, though. That part's not a lie. I'm 2 seasons behind. I've been 2 seasons behind for 3 years. She just never called it in, because a struggling ranch nobody wants is worth more to her sitting there than it is foreclosed. It's leverage. It's a thing she can squeeze when she needs to. His jaw worked. And now, all of a sudden, she needs to. Because you're here. Anna felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. I did this. I brought this to your door. No. Ethan crossed the room. She did this. You just gave her the excuse. There's a difference, and I need you to hold on to it, because if you start thinking you're a curse instead of a target, you'll make bad decisions. Targets fight back. Curses run. He stopped in front of her. Which one are you? Anna looked up at him. I'm tired of running, she said. Good. Ethan nodded once. Then we've got a problem to solve. Sit down. They talked at the table until the lamp burned low. He said unmarried, Ethan said. That's the lever he's pulling. A woman under my roof, no ring, no vows. In a town like this, that's not a scandal, it's a reason. A reason to call the note. A reason to say the household's unfit. A reason for every decent Christian in Wolf Creek to nod along while she takes everything I've got. He rubbed his face. She's trying to use you as the crowbar to pry me off this land. Then I'll go. Anna started to rise. If I leave, the reason leaves with me. Sit down. It wasn't loud, but it stopped her. If you leave, 3 things happen. 1, you're alone on the road with a ruined name and nowhere to go, and a woman who wants you gone permanently. And I have to explain to your dead father why I put his daughter back out in the cold. 2, she takes my land anyway next season, because the note's still there, and the leverage was never really about you. You just made the timing convenient. And 3, He paused. 3 is she wins twice, she gets my land, and she gets to say she ran you out. 2 victories for the price of 1 lie. I've spent 15 years handing that woman's people small victories because it was easier than fighting. I'm done doing that. Anna sat. So, what do we do? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke carefully like a man stepping onto ice. He said, unmarried. He said again, so we take that lever away from her. Anna's breath stopped. You mean? I mean, your father wrote it in a letter, and I've been telling myself all day it was a dying man's fever. Ethan looked at her, and there was no romance in his face, no softness, nothing but grim arithmetic. But it's not a bad idea. It's a good idea. It's the only idea. If we marry, the household's not unfit. There's no scandal. There's no crowbar. Doyle's got nothing to bring to the bank but a note that isn't due yet, and Evelyn Crow's fastest move is gone. He set his hands flat on the table. It's not a marriage of anything but sense, Anna. I want that clear. I'm not asking you to love me, and I'm not offering to love you. I'm offering you a name and a roof and a fight, and I'm asking you for the same lever back because a married man with a wife who knows how to read a ledger is a harder man to break than a lonely one. Anna stared at him. She thought of every reason to say no. She was a stranger. He was a stranger with a name the whole territory whispered. She'd come here running from ruin, and now she was being asked to marry into a fight with the very woman who'd ruined her. It was madness. It was exactly the kind of desperate cornered decision her father would have warned her against. Except her father hadn't warned her against it. Her father had asked for it. Rules, Anna said. Ethan blinked. What if we do this? There are rules. Her voice steadied as she spoke the bookkeeper, in her taking over, needing the ledger balanced. Honesty over emotion. You don't lie to me, and I don't lie to you, not even to be kind. Work over promises. We prove things by doing them, not by saying them. And partnership over dependency. I don't work for you, and I'm not kept by you. Whatever this is, I'm in it as an equal, or I'm not in it at all. Something moved in Ethan's face. Something that might, on another man, have been the beginning of respect. Those are good rules, he said. They're the only rules I have left. Anna held out her hand across the table the way her father used to close a deal, the way a man would. So, do you agree to them? Ethan looked at her hand. Then he took it. I agree to them, he said. And that was how Anna Bennett became engaged to marry a man she'd met the night before at a kitchen table over a handshake, with the wind screaming at the roof, and Evelyn Crow's shadow already reaching across the county for both of them. They rode into Wolf Creek 4 days later to see the preacher. Anna felt the town's eyes the second the wagon crossed the first street. She'd expected it, braced for it, and it still landed like cold water. The way conversation stopped, the way a woman on the boardwalk touched her companion's arm, and leaned in to whisper, the way a shopkeeper stepped out to watch and then stepped back in to tell whoever was inside. The thief. The coal man. Together. Well, I never. Chin up, Ethan said quietly, not looking at her. You give them nothing. Not fear, not shame. You look at every one of them like they're the ones with something to explain. That's easy for you. You've had 15 years of practice. I have, Ethan agreed. And I'll tell you the one thing I learned. They can only take from you what you agree to be ashamed of, so don't agree. Anna lifted her chin. The preacher, Reverend Hollis, was an old man with kind, worried eyes, and he married them quickly and quietly in the little church with no one present but his wife as witness. He didn't ask questions. Anna suspected he'd been told not to, or told to refuse them entirely, and had chosen this middle path as the most conscience he could afford in a town Evelyn Crow owned, at the words man and wife. Ethan looked at her, and for 1/2 second, something flickered across his face that wasn't arithmetic at all. Then it was gone, and he was Ethan Cole again, closed and careful, and he shook the Reverend's hand, and paid him, and walked her back out into the street with his jaw set. They didn't kiss. It hadn't been that kind of vow. But when they stepped out onto the boardwalk, Evelyn Crow was waiting for them. Anna had built a picture of her in her mind over 8 months of ruin. A monster, a gorgon, something you'd know for evil at 50 paces. The reality was worse, because the reality was ordinary. Evelyn Crow was a handsome woman of 50 in a fine gray dress gloved and composed with a face that had decided a long time ago exactly how much of itself to show. She stood at the bottom of the church steps, with 2 men behind her, and she smiled up at them, with what a stranger might have mistaken for warmth. "Mr. Cole?" Her voice was low and pleasant. "And my goodness, is it Miss Bennet, or should I say Mrs. Cole now?" The smile widened by a precise, cruel fraction. "How quickly you've landed on your feet, dear, and here I'd been so worried about you." "Mrs. Crow." Anna's voice came out steadier than she felt. "How kind of you to worry." "Oh, I always worry about my former employees, especially the troubled ones." Evelyn's eyes flicked to Ethan. "You know what she is, of course. You must. The whole territory knows. A man marrying a known thief well. It's very charitable of you, Mr. Cole. Though some might call it desperate." "Some might," Ethan said. "I don't much care what some call anything. Never have." "No." Evelyn agreed softly. "You never did. It's the thing I've always found most interesting about you, Mr. Cole. You genuinely don't understand how the world works." She smoothed one glove. "A word of friendly advice since we're neighbors. This girl is trouble. She sees things that aren't there, invents wickedness where there is only honest business, and then she takes what isn't hers. She did it to me. She'll do it to you. And when she does, when she robs you blind and runs, you'll remember I stood on these steps and warned you." Anna felt the fury rise up her spine like heat. "I didn't invent anything," she said before she could stop herself. "I found something. And you know I did. You know exactly what I found." For one single unguarded instant, the smile left Evelyn Crow's face. It was gone so fast that Anna would spend the whole ride home wondering if she'd imagined it. But she hadn't. She'd seen it. A flash of something cold and calculating, and underneath it, unmistakably afraid. Then the smile returned, seamless, and Evelyn Crow laughed a small, pitying laugh. "You see, Mr. Cole," she said gently, "delusions. I do hope for your sake they're not catching." She turned to go. Then she paused and looked back and delivered the last line the way a person sets down a card they've been holding all along. "Do give my regards to the bank," she said. "I understand your note is being reviewed. Such uncertain times. A man never knows when the ground might shift beneath him." Her eyes moved once deliberately to Anna. "Especially a man who's just taken on a very expensive new burden." And she walked away down the boardwalk, and the town parted around her like water around a stone. They didn't speak until Wolf Creek was behind them and the road was empty. Then Ethan said, "You saw it too." "Saw what?" "When you said you found something." Her face. He kept his eyes on the road. For half a second she wasn't playing a woman warning a fool about a thief. For half a second she was a woman who just heard a door creak in a house she thought was empty. Anna's hands tightened in her lap. "She's afraid." "She's afraid," Ethan agreed. "Which tells me 2 things. One, whatever you found is real and worse than you know, or she wouldn't have burned your whole life down over $40 you never took. Nobody destroys a bookkeeper over $40. You destroy a bookkeeper over what a bookkeeper can prove." And the second thing, Ethan was quiet a moment. "The second thing is that she just made a mistake. She let us see the fear. Now we know it's there. And a scared person moves too fast and reaches too far. You said it yourself, that's why she skipped the arrest, because an arrest was slow and public, and gave you a chance to talk." He glanced at her. "She's about to skip a lot of things she shouldn't skip, and I mean to be standing right there when she does." Anna looked at him. At this man who 4 days ago had held a rifle on her, who had married her at a table over a handshake, who owed everything to a dead man, and had chosen to pay that debt with his own ruin as collateral. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really, not the debt, not the lever. Why are you really doing this?" Ethan didn't answer for a long time. 15 years ago, he said finally. Something happened in this town, and Evelyn Crow's people made sure everyone believed the version that was easiest for them. I didn't fight it. I was young, and I was grieving, and I was ashamed of things that weren't even mine to be ashamed of, and I let them make me into the story they wanted. I crawled out here to this ranch, and I let the whole world believe I was the monster because fighting it seemed harder than disappearing. He drew a breath. And I've hated myself for it every single day since. Because your father was right about me, and I never once earned it. He looked at her. So no, it's not the debt. It's that I spent 15 years being a coward, and a dying man handed me one last chance to stop. His voice was rough. I'm not letting her do to you what they did to me. I don't care what it costs. I'm done being the story. Anna didn't have words for what that did to her chest, so she said the only true thing she had. Then we're the same, she said, because I'm done too. That night back at the ranch, she couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was the ledger. Somewhere in her memory, 3 months of Evelyn Crow's accounts sat waiting half understood, buried under panic and ruin. She'd been too frightened to look at them properly the first time. She'd wanted only to survive to finish the quarter to get out. But she wasn't only surviving anymore. She got up, lit the lamp, found paper and the stub of a pencil, and sat at the kitchen table in the middle of the night, and she began to write down everything she could remember. Every name that hadn't matched a face, every payment to a vendor with no wagon, every figure that had made her stomach drop 8 months ago, before she'd taught herself not to look. She was still writing when Ethan appeared in the doorway, hair sleep mussed, watching her. What are you doing? My job? Anna said, not looking up, the pencil flying. The one she ruined me for. I'm remembering. Ethan came and stood over her shoulder and looked at the columns of names and numbers taking shape on the page. Can you really rebuild it from memory? Not all of it, not enough to prove anything, not yet. She finally stopped and looked up at him, and her eyes were bright and hard in the lamplight. But I remember enough to know where the real records are. And I remember something else, Ethan, something I forgot I even knew until tonight. She set down the pencil. There was a woman, Dorothy Wells. She kept the books before me for 11 years. She trained me my first week, and then Evelyn let her go, very sudden, very quiet, and everyone said the old woman's eyes had finally gone. Anna leaned forward. But Dorothy Wells's eyes were fine, Ethan. I sat next to her for a week. She could read a ledger across a dark room. Evelyn didn't let her go because she was blind. Ethan went very still. She let her go, Anna said slowly, because Dorothy Wells had kept those books for 11 years, which means Dorothy Wells has seen everything. 11 years of it. And she's still alive, and she's still in this county, and she is the one living person besides me who knows what's really inside Evelyn Crow's accounts. The lamp guttered between them. Ethan let out a slow breath. Then that's where we start, he said. That's where we start, Anna agreed. Neither of them said the thing they both knew, that Evelyn Crow had already shown her fear on the church steps, that Francis Doyle's wagon had already come up the road, that the ground was already beginning to shift beneath their feet. Anna picked the pencil back up. Outside, far down the dark road toward Wolf Creek, a single light burned late in the window of the biggest house in the county, and behind it, Evelyn Crow was awake too, staring at nothing, doing arithmetic of her own. She had made a mistake on those church steps. She knew it the moment the girl had said, "You know exactly what I found." And Evelyn Crow had built an entire empire on one iron principle. You never ever left a mistake standing. She reached for paper and ink, and she began to write a letter of her own. The boots stopped outside her door, and Dorothy Wells did not move. She was 71 years old, and she had spent 11 of those years being nothing, and she had learned that the safest thing a nothing could do was hold still and let the dangerous thing decide she wasn't worth the trouble. So she sat with her hands folded on the empty table where the box had been that morning, and she waited. The knock, when it came, was polite. That was the worst part. Evelyn Crow's people were always polite. "Mrs. Wells." A man's voice. "Sorry to trouble you so late. I've got a message from Mrs. Crow." Dorothy closed her clouded eyes. So it was here then. The thing she'd been waiting for since the morning Anna Bennett knocked on this same door. She'd known it would come. She'd hoped for a week. She'd gotten a day. "I'm an old blind woman," she called back, making her voice thin and frightened, which took no acting at all. "It's late for messages. Won't take a moment. Mrs. Crow wanted to make sure you were being looked after. You being alone out here and all." Looked after. Dorothy nearly laughed. In 20 years, she had never once heard Evelyn Crow use a kind word that wasn't a knife with a ribbon on it. She got up slowly, deliberately, letting her chair scrape, letting him hear an old woman's difficulty. And as she crossed the small room toward the door, she took stock of the one thing that mattered. The box was gone. She'd carried it that afternoon, wrapped in an old shawl, 3 houses down to Ruth Tanner, a widow even poorer and more forgotten than herself, a woman so far beneath Evelyn Crow's notice she might as well not exist. "Keep this under your bed and don't look inside it," Dorothy had told her, "and if anything happens to me, you give it to the Bennett girl and nobody else." Ruth hadn't asked a single question. The poor rarely did. Questions were a luxury. So when Dorothy Wells opened her door to the polite man in the dark, she opened it to a man who had come to find something that was no longer there. "Well," she said. "Say your message then. My feet are cold." He was younger than his voice had pulled low, and he stepped inside without being asked, which told her everything. He looked around the room. She could hear it. The slow turn of his boots, the pause of a man cataloging, and she stood aside and let him look, because there was nothing to find, and a man who finds nothing goes away. "Cozy," he said. "It's a poor house. There's nothing in it worth the walk you made. Say your piece." "Mrs. Crow heard you had visitors this morning." There it was. Did she? Dorothy shuffled to her chair and lowered herself into it, buying time, thinking fast behind her ruined eyes. "I'm sure Mrs. Crow hears about every soul who so much as passes my window. She always did like to know things." She folded her hands. "Yes, I had a visitor, the Bennett girl. Come to cry on an old woman's shoulder about her troubles, as if I've got shoulders to spare. What did she want? Pity mostly, and to ask if I remembered her from when I trained her that 1 week before Mrs. Crow let me go." Dorothy made her voice bitter, which again took no acting. "I told her I remembered. I told her she was a fool to have crossed a woman like Evelyn Crow, and a bigger fool to marry the coal man, and the biggest fool of all to come to my door where anyone might see. And I told her to leave and not come back." She lifted her chin toward where she guessed his face was. "Is that the message you wanted, young man? That an old blind pauper sent the girl packing? You can tell Mrs. Crow I've got no use for troublemakers. I learned my lesson 11 years ago. I keep to myself, and I keep my mouth shut, and I'd like to keep it that way till I die, which won't be long." It was, she thought, a fine performance. Frightened, resentful, harmless. The performance of a woman who'd been broken years ago and knew it. The man was quiet for a moment. "Mind if I look around?" And there it was, the real reason he'd come. Not a message. A search. Dorothy's heart was slamming against her ribs, but her voice came out flat and tired. "Look at what a blind woman's poverty. Look all you like. There's a bed, a table, a stove that barely draws, and a trunk of dead clothes I'll be buried in. If you find anything worth stealing, take it, and God help you, because it means you're poorer than me." He looked. She sat and let him, listening to every movement. The trunk lid, the scrape of it, the rustle of her few clothes, his hand under the mattress, the cupboard, the loose board by the stove that she'd deliberately left loose and empty, because a searcher who finds one hiding place stops looking for a second. She heard him find it, heard the small grunt of satisfaction, heard the disappointment when it held nothing but a tin of coins she kept there precisely to be found. He took the coins. Of course he did. "That's all my money," she said, and let her voice crack, real fear bleeding into the performance now. "Please, that's all I have." "Consider it a fee," he said, "for wasting Mrs. Crow's time." and she heard him move toward the door, and she let herself sag with relief that she prayed he'd read as an old woman's defeat. But he stopped at the door. "Funny thing," he said. "You keep a real tidy house for a blind woman. Table's clean, no dust where something used to sit." A pause. Almost like something got moved off it. Recent. Dorothy Wells felt her blood turn to water. "I dusted this morning," she said. "After the girl left. She got mud on my table with her crying elbows all over it. So I dusted. Is that a crime now, keeping a clean table?" She heard the shrillness in her own voice and hated it and used it. "You've taken my money. You've searched my house. You've frightened an old woman half to death in the dark. What more does Evelyn Crow want from me? I've got nothing. I've had nothing for 11 years. She saw to that herself. Go tell her the pauper's still a pauper, and leave me be." The silence stretched long enough that Dorothy began quietly to say goodbye to her life. Then the man laughed short and dismissive. "Nothing here," he said mostly to himself. "Old woman's right. She's got nothing." And she heard him step out into the night, heard his boots on the step, and then on the dirt, heard the creak of leather as he mounted, heard the horse move off into the dark. Dorothy Wells sat alone in the ruin of her searched house, and only then, with no one to see, did she let herself shake. She had survived. Barely. On a dusted table, and a tin of decoy coins, and 11 years of learning to be nothing. But she understood with perfect clarity what it meant that the man had come at all. It meant Evelyn Crow already knew. It meant the week Anna had promised them was gone. It meant the box under Ruth Tanner's bed was now the most dangerous object in the territory, and every hour it stayed hidden was an hour on borrowed time. She had to get word to the girl. Tonight. Tomorrow at the latest. Before Evelyn Crow sent someone less easily fooled than a man who stopped searching after one loose board. But Dorothy Wells was 71 and blind, and had no horse and no way to reach a ranch 6 miles out, and the only person she could send was herself on foot in the dark at the pace of an old woman who could barely make the church steps. She reached for her shawl. She was going anyway. 6 miles away, Anna couldn't sleep, and this time she didn't fight it. She lit the lamp and sat at the table with her memory ledger, the one she'd been building since that first sleepless night, and she worked. She wrote down every ghost vendor Dorothy had confirmed. She drew the shape of the scheme as she now understood it, the loans that trapped the skimming, that bled the fake companies, that laundered the mountain of clean money at the center of the web. She was so deep in it that she didn't hear Ethan come in until he set a cup of coffee at her elbow. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I don't sleep much. Haven't for 15 years. He sat across from her. "What are you seeing?" Anna set down her pencil. "I'm seeing that Dorothy's right. It's beautiful. In the way she said the ugly way. Look." She turned the paper toward him. "Every business she has a hand in, she structured the same. She lends them money, takes a share, installs a bookkeeper. Then the ghost vendors start appearing in their accounts. And here's the thing. Ethan, here's the thing that makes it perfect. The businesses never fail. Not all the way. She keeps them just alive. Because a dead business gets its books examined. An estate sale, an auditor, a bankruptcy court, that's 100 fresh eyes on the ledgers. So she never lets them die. She just keeps them bleeding forever, struggling, grateful for her loans, too busy surviving to ever look up and notice they've been robbed for 20 years. Ethan stared at the paper. "That's my ranch," he said. "That's exactly my ranch. Never quite dying, never quite living." "That's your ranch. That's Dorothy's old mill. That's half of Wolf Creek." Anna's voice was quiet and hard. "And the beauty of it, the horror of it, is that everybody blames themselves. You blamed yourself for 15 years. The mill owner blames the railroad. The mercantile blames the weather. Nobody blames her because she's the one who lent them the rope. And how do you blame the woman who kept you alive?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "How do we break something like that?" he said. "Something everybody's been trained to be grateful for. We prove it. In numbers. So plain that even a grateful man can't argue with it." Anna tapped the ledger. "That's what Dorothy's records do. 11 years of ghost vendors in her hand, dated. I take those and I match them against the real ledgers. Even one real ledger, even your accounts. Ethan, the feed bills and supply costs you've kept all these years, and I showed that the vendor Evelyn Crow paid, never delivered a single thing to the business that paid it. A payment with no goods. 100 payments with no goods. 1,000. Her eyes were bright. You can't argue with that. You can't explain it away as weather or railroads or bad luck. Money went out. Nothing came back. Over and over to companies that don't exist. That's not misfortune. That's theft in writing, and once it's in writing in front of the right person, she's finished. The right person being someone she doesn't own. Anna leaned back. That's the whole game now, Ethan. Everything comes down to reaching someone outside her web before she reaches us. A federal marshal, the territorial court in the capital. Someone whose bread she doesn't buy. She rubbed her eyes. 1 week. Dorothy teaches me the code, I take the records. I build the case, we ride to the Capitol and hand it to a stranger who's never heard her name. 1 week, and we're... A sound outside. Ethan was on his feet before Anna had finished turning her head. The rifle already in his hands, 15 years of living alone and mistrusted, had given him reflexes he'd never lost. He moved to the side of the window without crossing in front of it. Someone's on the road, he said low. On foot, coming slow. Anna's heart climbed into her throat. One person. One, small. He watched. Moving wrong, stumbling. A pause, and then his voice changed. It's a woman. He was out the door before Anna could speak, rifle up, and she grabbed the lamp and followed, and the light spilled out across the yard, and found the figure lurching up the last of the road, bent shawled, gasping, one hand pressed to her side. Dorothy, Anna breathed, and then she was running. Dorothy Wells had walked 6 miles in the dark on 71-year-old legs, and when Anna caught her, she nearly collapsed into the younger woman's arms, her breath coming in terrible ragged pulls, her whole body shaking with cold and effort. She knows, Dorothy managed. Child, she already knows. A man came, tonight, to my house. Each word cost her. Searched it, for the records. She knows about the records or guesses close enough. Your week is gone. Get her inside, Anna said, and Ethan already had the old woman's other arm, and between them they half carried her into the warmth and set her by the stove and wrapped her in blankets while she shook. Slow, Ethan said. Breathe. You're safe here. Tell it slow. But Dorothy grabbed Anna's wrist with that same iron grip from the day before, and her clouded eyes were wild. There's no slow, she said. That's what I walked 6 miles to tell you. There's no more slow. He searched my whole house for that box. He didn't find it because I moved it this afternoon. God put the thought in my head. This afternoon, I don't know why. I just knew I moved it 3 houses down to Ruth Tanner, and she's got it under her bed, and she doesn't know what it is, and nobody would ever think to look at Ruth Tanner. Dorothy's breath heaved. But he came tonight. The same day you visited. That's how fast she moves. She heard you were at my house this morning, and by dark, she had a man tearing my floorboards up. Her grip tightened until it hurt. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what she'll do next when the man tells her he found nothing? She'll know I hid it. She'll know it exists, and she will not stop at searching a second time. The fire popped in the silence. Then we get the box tonight, Ethan said. Right now. We ride in, we get it from this Tanner woman we know. Dorothy and Anna said it at the same moment. Anna looked at Ethan. If we ride into Wolf Creek in the middle of the night and come out carrying a box, we're doing exactly what her man was sent to catch us doing. She'll have someone watching the roads now. She has to. She knows we're the threat. Anna's mind was racing the bookkeeper cold and clear even now. The box is safest exactly where it is, with a woman nobody's watching under a bed. Nobody would search in a house beneath Evelyn Crow's notice. The second we touch it, it becomes visible. Right now, it's invisible. Invisible is safe. For how long? Ethan said grimly. Long enough to be smart. Anna knelt in front of Dorothy. Mrs. Wells. The code. You said the records are in cipher, that they're worthless without you to read them. If anything happens to you, that's the other reason I walked 6 miles to die on your road, Dorothy said, and she reached into the front of her dress under the blankets and drew out a folded paper damp with sweat and pressed it into Anna's hands. I wrote it down, on the way, well before I left, and I finished it walking in the dark from memory, so forgive the hand. Her ruined eyes fixed on Anna. It's the key. The cipher. How to read every mark in that box. I was going to teach you slow over a week, careful. There's no week. So there it is all at once on one page. She closed Anna's fingers around it. Now if I die tomorrow, the box still speaks. You can still read it. That's what matters. Not me, the reading. Anna held the paper like it was made of glass. You didn't have to walk 6 miles to give me this, she said, her voice thick. You could have waited for morning. For safety. There is no safety, child. Haven't you been listening? Dorothy's voice cracked and steadied. And I've done enough waiting for one lifetime. I waited 11 years. I watched her do it, and I waited and I hid, and I called it wisdom. I'm done waiting. Your father wasn't the fool. I was the fool. She gripped Anna's hand around the paper. Tonight, I stopped being the fool. I walked 6 miles in the dark to hand you the one thing she can't take from you if she takes me. Let an old coward have that. Let me have one brave thing before the end. Anna couldn't speak. She put her arms around the shaking old woman and held her, and Dorothy Wells, who had been nothing for 11 years, let herself be held. Ethan stood over them, and his jaw was set, and something had settled in his face, a decision. She stays here, he said. Dorothy. She's not going back to that house. Dorothy pulled back from Anna. If I don't go back, she'll know for certain I've thrown in with you. Right now she suspects. If the pauper vanishes overnight, she knows. She already knows enough to search your house in the dark, Ethan said. I'm not putting you back in a house Evelyn Crow's men have the address of. You're an old woman who walked 6 miles to save my wife's case. You're not walking back into that. His voice left no room. You stay. We'll figure the rest. And Dorothy Wells, who had argued with Anna, who had argued with her own fear for 11 years, looked at the scarred, mistrusted man the whole county called a monster, and something in her ruined face softened past the point of arguing. Your father, she said to Anna, not taking her eyes off Ethan, chose better than he knew. They put her in the small room off the kitchen, the one Anna had slept in that first night, and she was asleep almost before her head touched the pillow, worn all the way through. Anna and Ethan sat back at the table, the folded cipher key between them, like a live coal, and neither of them spoke for a long while. The week's gone, Anna said finally. The week's gone. Ethan agreed. So we go faster. I have the key now. I can read the records without her, which means... Anna stopped, turned it over. Which means the moment I have the box, I don't need anything else. I don't need a month of cross-referencing. I have your accounts, your feed bills, your supply receipts, 15 years of them. You kept them. You told me you kept them. Every scrap, in the trunk in my room, never threw one away, figured if I was going to fail, I'd at least know exactly how. Then that's the second ledger. Anna was on her feet now, pacing the whole thing, assembling in her mind. Dorothy's box shows what Evelyn paid the ghost vendors in her own operation and everyone else's. Your receipts show what your ranch actually received. I match one ghost vendor from her books to one of your feed bills where the feed never came, one clean, provable, undeniable case, and I don't need 100. I need one airtight that even a bought judge can't wave away. And then I take it to the Capitol, and the ones who look at it start asking about the other 99 themselves. She stopped and looked at him. We don't need a week. We need the box one night to build the case and one ride to the Capitol. 3 days. We can do it in 3 days. Ethan stood too. Then how do we get the box without her seeing? And Anna smiled, the first real smile Ethan had seen on her, thin and fierce and dangerous. We don't get it, she said. Ruth Tanner brings it to us. A poor widow riding out to a ranch to sell eggs or take in washing or beg a day's work. That's nothing. That's beneath notice. That's the same invisibility that's kept the box safe. She looked toward the room where Dorothy slept. Dorothy trusted Ruth with the box. If Dorothy vouches for her, Ruth can carry it out here in a basket under a dozen eggs, and Evelyn Crow's watchers will see a hungry widow looking for work and look right past her. The same way they looked past Dorothy for 11 years. Her whole system runs on ignoring the poor. So we use the poor she's trained herself not to see. Ethan looked at his wife for a long moment, and there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Not gratitude, not the old grim arithmetic, but something warmer and more astonished. Something he didn't have a name for and wasn't ready to. "Your father," he started and stopped. "Don't," Anna said softly. "Not yet. Ask me when it's over, when I'm still standing." But it was in that moment, standing in the low lamplight with a dead man's letter behind them and an old woman's cipher between them and the richest, most dangerous person in the territory, already hunting them both, that Ethan Cole understood the marriage of survival had quietly, without either of them deciding, it become something else. He didn't say it. Neither did she. There wasn't time, and there wouldn't be until this was finished. But it was there in the room with them, real as the fire, real as the fear. They didn't get to sit in it long. Because 2 days later, after Dorothy had rested, after word had been carefully, invisibly passed to Ruth Tanner, through a woman who sold thread after the plan was set for the widow to ride out with her eggs. On Thursday morning, Francis Doyle's foreclosure papers arrived. Not by wagon this time, not by messenger. Doyle brought them himself, and he brought the sheriff, and he brought 2 men. Ethan didn't recognize, and they came up the road in the middle of a working Tuesday, with the sun high and everything visible, no darkness to hide behind, no invisibility to protect anyone. Ethan met them in the yard with the rifle down at his side, not raised, just present. "Francis," he said, "you brought friends." Doyle wouldn't meet his eyes. He held out the papers with a hand that wasn't quite steady. The note's called Ethan, in full. You've got 30 days to pay it or the bank takes the ranch. His voice was wooden, a man reading his own confession. "I'm sorry. It's the bank's decision." "The bank's decision." Ethan didn't take the papers. "You mean her decision. Say it once, Francis. Just once out loud so we both know you're a grown man and not a puppet. Say whose decision it is." The sheriff shifted. The 2 strangers watched, and Francis Doyle stood in Ethan Cole's yard with the foreclosure in his outstretched hand, and for one long, agonizing moment, it looked as though he might finally say the true thing. Then Anna came out onto the porch, and behind her in the doorway, blinking in the daylight, she could barely see, came Dorothy Wells, and Francis Doyle's face went white as bone, because Doyle knew Dorothy Wells. Doyle had been at the bank 11 years ago when Evelyn Crow let her go. Doyle knew the way everyone who'd ever done Evelyn Crow's dirty accounting knew exactly what Dorothy Wells had spent 11 years being the one bookkeeper who'd lasted long enough to see the whole thing. And here she was standing in the doorway of the very ranch Evelyn Crow had just sent him to seize alive and warm and sheltered, which meant she'd talked, which meant the thing Doyle had spent his whole cowardly life terrified of had already happened. The papers trembled in his hand. "Well, Francis," Dorothy said in a voice that carried clear across the yard, an old woman's voice with 11 years of held silence finally breaking in it. "You've grown up into exactly the man I always feared you'd be, handing a good man his ruin because she told you to." She came forward to the edge of the porch, blind and small and utterly unafraid. "I know what you did to your books at the bank, Francis Doyle. I saw the entries. I saw what she caught you at all those years ago that made you hers forever. I never told a living soul, but I remember every figure." Her clouded eyes found the general direction of his face with terrible accuracy. "How long are you going to keep paying for one mistake? She's owned you for 11 years over a thing you could have confessed and survived. When does it end? When she has you handing foreclosures to good men? When she has you doing worse? Where's the bottom of it for you, Francis? Because I promise you she hasn't found it yet." The yard was dead silent. The sheriff was looking at Doyle now, So were the two strangers. And Francis Doyle stood there with the foreclosure papers shaking in his hand and 11 years of terror and self-loathing rising up in his throat, looking at the one woman alive who knew the exact shape of the leash around his neck and who had just described it out loud in front of witnesses in the sunlight. His hand lowered. The papers dropped to his side. "I can't," he said. It came out cracked, barely a whisper. Then louder to the sheriff, to no one, to himself. "I can't do this anymore." And Francis Doyle, bank manager, valued servant of Evelyn Crow for 11 long years, turned around in Ethan Cole's yard and walked back to his horse and rode away, leaving the foreclosure papers to fall in the dirt, leaving the sheriff and two strangers standing in a yard that had just without a single shot fired, tilted the whole war on its axis. Anna picked the papers up out of the dust. She looked at Dorothy Wells, who was swaying now with the effort of what she'd just done, drained white but still standing. And Dorothy Wells said to no one and to everyone in the ringing quiet, "That's the first one. She's going to lose them one at a time now, every soul she ever caught. Because the only thing holding her empire together was every frightened person believing they were the only one." Her ruined eyes turned toward the road where Doyle had vanished. "And I just showed one of them he's not alone." Francis Doyle did not go home. He rode out of Ethan Cole's yard with the whole county's future in the set of his shoulders, and he did not turn toward Wolf Creek, and he did not turn toward his bank, and he did not turn toward Evelyn Crow's fine house to beg forgiveness for the thing he'd just failed to do. He rode instead to the one place he'd been avoiding for 11 years, and he sat on his horse outside it for a long time before he found the nerve to go in. The sheriff's office. But that came later, and by the time it mattered, everything had already changed twice. Back at the ranch, the sheriff and the two strangers still stood in the yard, and Ethan Cole still had his rifle down at his side, and nobody moved for a moment, because nobody was quite sure what had just happened. "Well," the sheriff said finally. He was an older man, gray at the temples, and Ethan had known him a long time, in the distant, careful way you know a man who's part of a system that's failed you. "That's the strangest foreclosure I ever rode out on." "Sheriff Barrett." Ethan kept his voice even. "You want to tell me who your two friends are? They're not from Wolf Creek. I know every face in that town, and I've never seen either of theirs." Barrett glanced back at the two strangers, and something in his expression was complicated. "That's the thing, Ethan. I didn't bring them. They asked to ride along. Said they had business out this way, and a foreclosure seemed a good chance to see the lay of the land." He lowered his voice. "They showed me papers this morning I wasn't expecting to see. That's the only reason I'm telling you, instead of doing my job the way Doyle wanted it done." One of the strangers stepped forward. He was younger, clean, with the kind of unhurried confidence that didn't come from money, but from something else, from carrying an authority that couldn't be bought. "Mr. Cole," he said, "my name is Everett Hale. I'm a federal examiner out of the territorial court in the capital. This is my associate, Mr. Sturgis." He nodded past Ethan to the porch where Anna stood with the foreclosure papers still in her hand, and Dorothy Wells swaying beside her. "And I think from the look of things that I've ridden a very long way to a place where I'm expected." Anna's heart stopped. For a moment, she couldn't make the words mean anything. A federal examiner. The very thing she'd been planning to spend 3 days and a hard ride to the Capitol to find the one thing they needed most. The person outside Evelyn Crow's web was standing in Ethan Cole's yard on a Tuesday in the sunlight, because he'd attached himself to a foreclosure to see the country. It was too much luck. Anna's whole nature rebelled against it. Luck this good was a trap. "Why are you here, Mr. Hale?" she said from the porch, and her voice came out flat and hard. "The truth. Federal examiners don't ride out to watch a rancher lose his land for the scenery." Hale looked up at her, and something like approval crossed his face. "You must be Mrs. Cole," he said. "The bookkeeper." He let that land he knew who she was, which meant he'd come knowing things. "You're right not to trust it. So here's the truth. 6 months ago, the territorial court in the capital received a letter. Unsigned. It laid out in careful detail a system of fraud operating in this county. Ghost vendors laundered money, a web of loans used to control local businesses. It named no one, but it was written by someone who understood accounting the way few people do, and it was specific enough that we couldn't ignore it." He paused. We've spent 6 months quietly confirming the parts we could confirm from a distance, enough to know it was real. Not enough to name the person at the center. So I came to see for myself, quietly. And the moment I arrived in Wolf Creek and started asking careful questions, one name came up, and only one spoken, always in a whisper. His eyes didn't leave Anna's. Evelyn Crow. The yard was silent. An unsigned letter, Anna said slowly. 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Anna's hand rose to her mouth. 6 months ago, she had still been working in Evelyn Crow's office. 6 months ago, she had just found the ghost vendors and been too frightened to say a word to anyone. 6 months ago. My father? She whispered. Because who else? Who else in this county understood accounting well enough, cared enough, and had the courage to walk to Evelyn Crow's door? Thomas Bennett had told his daughter to tell no one what she'd found, not even me, and then Thomas Bennett had sat down and written the whole thing to the territorial court himself, unsigned, to protect her, to make sure that if anything happened to either of them, the truth was already moving somewhere Evelyn Crow couldn't reach. He hadn't just sent his daughter to an ally when he was dying. He'd sent the evidence to the Capitol while he still lived. 2 separate lines of attack laid down by a dying man, so that no matter which one Evelyn Crow managed to sever, the other would survive. He wrote it, Anna said, and her voice broke completely. My father wrote that letter before he died. He knew what she was, and he couldn't fight her here in a county she owned, so he wrote to the one place she didn't own, and he didn't sign it because a signature would have gotten me killed alongside him. She was crying now openly, and she didn't care. And then he came to you, to Ethan, with the other half. The letter to protect the truth. The daughter to protect the fight. He split it in 2, so she could never kill all of it at once. Ethan had gone still. Dorothy Wells reached out and gripped Anna's arm. Everett Hale removed his hat. If that's true, Mrs. Cole, he said quietly, then your father was one of the bravest men I've never met, and the most careful. Because he was right. If that letter had been signed, we'd have brought it here as evidence, made inquiries in his name, and he'd have died before we ever arrived of natural causes, I don't doubt. The lack of a signature is the only reason we came slow and quiet instead of loud and too late. He turned the hat in his hands. He bought 6 months of secrecy with his own anonymity. He knew exactly what he was doing. Anna sat down on the porch step because her legs wouldn't hold her. Everything her father had done reorganized itself in her mind one final time. The warning, tell no one, not even me. The letter to Ethan. The way he'd gone gray after visiting Evelyn Crow. It wasn't a broken old man's fear. It was a strategist's opening moves. Thomas Bennett had spent the last weeks of his life laying a trap so patient and so hidden that it had kept working for 6 months after he was in the ground. And it had just this very Tuesday closed its first jaw around Evelyn Crow without her ever seeing it coming. He must have known she'd kill him, Anna said. For going to her door, he must have known. He knew, Dorothy said softly. That's why he went. A man doesn't walk to Evelyn Crow's door to change her mind. He walks to it to be seen going, to make sure that when he died sudden 4 weeks later, at least one person would find it strange. He made himself a question child. He made his own death into a thing that didn't add up. And you've been the answer, walking around ever since. Anna wept, and Ethan came and sat beside her on the step and put his arm around her, and for a moment the federal examiner and the sheriff and the second stranger looked away to give the grief its room. Then Anna wiped her face and stood up because there was work to do and no time to grieve properly. And she had learned a long time ago that feeling could not touch the arithmetic. Mr. Hale, she said, and her voice was iron again. How much do you have right now? Enough to move on her. Hale's jaw tightened. That's the problem, Mrs. Cole. I have a 6-month-old unsigned letter, a great deal of local whispering, and a strong personal conviction. In front of a judge, that's nothing. Whispers aren't evidence. And every judge within 3 days' ride of this county has at one time or another benefited from Evelyn Crow's generosity. He said it with the flat disgust of an honest man describing a rotten system. I could confront her tomorrow, and she'd smile at me and produce a dozen respectable citizens to swear she's a saint, and I'd ride back to the capital with nothing, and she'd know I'd come, and every person who ever helped me would start dying of natural causes. I can't move on whispers. I need proof. Documented, dated, undeniable proof that even a bought judge can't dismiss. Anna looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Dorothy Wells. Then she looked at Ethan. "Then it's a good thing," she said slowly, "that you rode all this way to the one place in the territory where that proof exists." Everett Hale went very still. "Explain that," he said, and Anna Bennett. Anna Cole told him. "Not everything, not yet. Not the location of the box, because trust that fast was a luxury she couldn't afford even now. But enough. She told him there was a second set of books. 11 years of it. Kept in secret by the one bookkeeper who'd lasted long enough to see the whole scheme in cipher cross-referenceable against real accounts to prove that Evelyn Crow's ghost vendors had taken payment for goods that never existed. She told him it could be matched against 15 years of Ethan's own receipts to build a single case so clean and so undeniable that no bought judge on earth could wave it away. She did not tell him where it was. Everett Hale listened without moving, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Where is it?" he said. "Somewhere safe," Anna said. "Somewhere it stays until I've decided you're what you say you are. You'll forgive me, Mr. Hale, but I've learned the hard way what it costs to trust a smiling stranger who knows too much about me. You could be exactly what you claim. Or you could be the most careful thing Evelyn Crow has ever sent to my door, a man with real federal papers who came up alongside my foreclosure to win my trust and find my evidence so she can burn it before it ever reaches a court she doesn't own." Her eyes didn't waver. "I don't know which you are, not yet. So the box stays where it is." The second stranger, Sturgis, shifted, and there was something in the movement Anna didn't like, but Hale raised a hand without looking at him. "That," Hale said, "is exactly the answer I'd hoped to hear from someone worth trusting. A careless person hands the evidence to the first badge that rides up. You're not careless. Good." He put his hat back on. "I'll earn it then. Here's how. Sheriff Barrett, you've stood in this yard and watched a bank manager refuse to serve a legal foreclosure and ride off toward town. That's a thing that happened in front of federal witnesses. I'd suggest you go and find Mr. Doyle quietly and hear what a frightened man has to say when he's finally decided to stop being frightened, because a bank manager who breaks is worth more than any box. A bank manager can testify to what he did. Records only show what happened. A witness shows who chose it." And that was the second jaw closing. Though none of them knew it yet, because at that very hour, 6 miles away, Francis Doyle was sitting across a desk from a deputy in an office Evelyn Crow did not own, beginning to talk. Sheriff Barrett rode to find him. And what Barrett found when he tracked Doyle to the sheriff's office in the next county, over the one county seat Evelyn Crow's money had never quite reached, was a man pouring 11 years out of himself like water from a broken jug. Doyle told them everything. Not the accounting Doyle had never understood the accounting, that was the point. That was why Evelyn had needed Anna and Dorothy and their kind. Doyle told them the other thing. The thing only he knew. He told them how 11 years ago he'd made a single desperate error at the bank alone to himself quietly to cover a debt he was ashamed of, and how Evelyn Crow had found it within the week because Evelyn Crow found everything. He told them how she'd sat him down and shown him the entry and smiled and said she'd keep his secret, and how from that day he'd belonged to her. And then he told them the part that mattered, the part that turned a frightened man's confession into a weapon. He told them the names, because Francis Doyle had spent 11 years as the man who moved Evelyn Crow's money through the bank. He'd never understood the scheme, but he'd processed it every ghost vendor payment that ran through his institution, every deposit into every box he'd been told not to ask about. He couldn't explain what it meant. But he could produce from the bank's own records the paper trail of every dollar that had passed through his hands at Evelyn Crow's instruction for 11 years. The bank's records. Official ones. Not an old blind woman's cipher. The bank's own sworn stamped legal ledgers, which Doyle as manager could turn over the moment he chose to stop being owned. When Sheriff Barrett rode back to the ranch that evening and told them what Doyle had done, Anna sat down hard at the table and put her face in her hands, and Ethan thought for a moment she was weeping again until he realized she was laughing, a shaky, disbelieving, half-hysterical laugh. "Don't you see?" she said, lifting her face. "Don't you see what we have now?" She grabbed the pencil, her hands trembling. 3 sets of books, Ethan. 3. She wrote as she spoke, columns flying. Dorothy's cipher, 11 years of what the ghost vendors were supposed to have delivered. Your receipts, 15 years of proof they delivered nothing. And now, Doyle's bank records the official stamped legal trail of every dollar that moved. 3 independent sets of books from 3 separate sources that have never spoken to each other before this moment. Her eyes were burning. And when I lay them side by side, they tell the exact same story in 3 different hands. The vendor Evelyn paid. She stabbed the paper. Never delivered, and yet the money left the bank and vanished into a box she controlled. Same date, same amount. 3 witnesses. You cannot bribe your way out of 3 sets of books that agree, Ethan. There isn't a judge alive who can call that a coincidence. Everett Hale, who had stayed at the ranch through the afternoon, leaned over the table and looked at what she was building, and Anna watched a federal examiner, a man who confronted fraud for a living, go slowly pale with something like awe. "Mrs. Cole," he said quietly, "how long to build the case?" "The full case. The one I take to a court in the capital that Evelyn Crow has never touched." Anna looked at the 3 sources laid out in her mind, the cipher she could read now thanks to Dorothy's paper. Ethan's 15 years of receipts in the trunk. Doyle's bank records, which Barrett could bring in the morning. "Give me 2 nights, she said. 2 nights and the box, and I'll hand you a case so clean God himself couldn't argue with it." "Then it's time," Hale said, "to get the box." Anna nodded, and she looked at Dorothy Wells dozing now in the chair by the stove, worn to nothing by the day, and she thought of a poor widow named Ruth Tanner with a basket of eggs, and she thought of her father who had split the truth in 2, so it could never all die at once, and who had made his own death into a question that his daughter was still even now in the act of answering. "Ruth rides out Thursday," Anna said, "with the eggs. Nobody watches a poor widow. We wait for Thursday, we take the box, I build the case in 2 nights, and Mr. Hale rides for the capital with 3 sets of books that agree." She set down the pencil. "And then we finish what my father started." But Evelyn Crow was not finished either, because when the man she'd sent to Dorothy's house came back and told her he'd found nothing. No box, no records, just a frightened old pauper and a dusted table. Evelyn Crow did not relax. She grew still, the way she grew still before the worst of the things she did. A dusted table. Something moved off it. And the man who reported that Ethan Cole had a woman in the doorway of his ranch, an old woman blind, small, and Evelyn Crow understood in an instant that Dorothy Wells was not in her poor house, being nothing. Dorothy Wells was 6 miles away under Ethan Cole's roof, alive and warm and talking. She'd let Dorothy Wells live for 11 years. It had been, she now saw, the one mistake she'd left standing. And then Francis Doyle failed to appear at the bank on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, and a whisper reached her. Evelyn Crow's whispers reached everywhere that a bank manager had been seen riding into the next county to the one sheriff's office her money had never bought. Evelyn Crow sat alone in her fine house on Wednesday night, and she did the arithmetic. And the arithmetic told her something she had not felt in 20 years. She was losing. Doyle had broken. Dorothy Wells was talking. The Bennett girl had married the one man in the county with nothing left to lose, and somewhere between the 2 of them was a box of records that could hang her. And now there were federal men in the county she knew about Hale. She knew about Hale by Wednesday night, because Evelyn Crow always found everything, even now, even losing, even. But a scared person moves too fast and reaches too far. Ethan had said it. Anna had said it. Dorothy had said it. Evelyn Crow had built an empire on never being the scared one, on making other people scared, while she stayed cold and patient and precise. And now, for the first time in 20 years, Evelyn Crow was the scared one. And she did what scared people do. She reached too far. On Thursday morning before dawn, while a poor widow named Ruth Tanner was loading a basket of eggs onto a sway-backed mule to ride out to the Cole Ranch, Evelyn Crow sent 3 men not to search a house. This time, not politely, not in the dark to fool an old woman. She sent them to the Cole Ranch itself in force with a simple instruction: find the records, burn the ranch, and make sure that whatever the Bennett girl had found, and whoever she'd told, ended today. She'd meant to send them at first light. But Ruth Tanner, riding out on her mule with her basket of eggs, taking the long, low road that poor women take, passed the 3 riders on the main road in the gray before dawn, and Ruth Tanner, who had spent her whole life being invisible, who nobody ever watched them. She saw where they were headed. She saw the coiled rope and the cans that sloshed. And Ruth Tanner, poor and forgotten and beneath all notice, dug her heels into that sway-backed mule and rode cross-country over ground. No 3 men on fine horses would dare the basket of eggs breaking beneath her, the box that could hang Evelyn Crow bouncing against her chest, where she'd hidden it under her shawl, because Dorothy had told her, if anything happens, you give it to the Bennett girl and nobody else. And Ruth Tanner had decided that 3 armed men riding toward the Cole Ranch at dawn counted most certainly as something happening. She beat them there by 20 minutes. She came up the last of the road on a lathered, half-dead mule screaming Anna's name into the dark, and Ethan was out the door with the rifle before she'd finished the first cry, and Ruth Tanner fell off the mule into the dirt of the yard and pulled the box out from under her shawl with shaking hands and held it up. "Dorothy said give it to you and nobody else," she gasped. "And there's men coming, 3 of them, on the main road, with rope and in cans, Mrs. Cole cans that slosh. They're 20 minutes behind me, maybe less, and they mean to burn you." Anna took the box, 11 years of Evelyn Crow's ghosts in her 2 hands at last, and down the main road in the gray before dawn came the sound of horses. The horses were coming, and Anna Cole stood in her own yard holding 11 years of proof in 2 hands, and she understood in that instant that the whole war had just come down to 20 minutes. "Inside," Ethan said. His voice had gone flat, and terrible, the voice of a man who'd spent 15 years alone, and knew exactly what it was to fight from a corner. "All of you. Now." "Ethan, the box goes where they can't reach it, and neither can you. Move." He was already positioning himself, rifle up, eyes on the road. "Ruth the mule into the barn out of sight. Anna, get Dorothy and the box down into the root cellar and don't come up no matter what you hear. You understand me, no matter what you hear." But Anna didn't move toward the cellar. She grabbed Ethan's arm and turned him half around, and her eyes were burning. "No," she said. "Listen to me. If we hide, we lose. Even if we survive the morning, we lose. 3 men burn your ranch and ride off, and it's the thief and the monster's word against a respectable woman's, and the box burns with the house, and my father died for nothing." Her grip tightened. "You told me. That first day. Targets fight back, curses run. You told me not to be a curse." She thrust the box into Dorothy's arms and turned back to him. "So we don't hide the proof and pray. We make sure it's already gone before they get here. Ruth's mule is spent, but Hale's horse isn't." Everett Hale, standing in the doorway with his coat half on, understood in an instant. "Give me the box," Hale said. "I ride now hard for the capital. Even if they burn everything behind me, I carry the one thing that finishes her, and there's not a horse in Evelyn Crow's stable that catches a federal examiner with a 2-county head start. No." Anna's mind was moving faster than the horses. "If you ride out now, straight down the road, you ride into them. 3 armed men, one of you. They'll cut you down and take the box, and there won't even be a story left to tell." She turned. "Ruth, the cross-country track you came in on. The one no fine horse would take. Can a man on a good horse follow it out the back the way you came in?" "A brave one could," Ruth said. "It's rough, but it comes out on the north road 3 miles up past where they'd think to look. Then that's the ride." Anna took the box back from Dorothy and pressed it into Hale's hands. "You go out the back cross-country north road, and you don't stop for anything until there's a courthouse between you and this county. Sturgis rides with you. 2 men are harder to stop than 1, and if one falls, the other carries it." She looked at Hale hard. "Can you read Dorothy's cipher?" "No." Then it's useless to them and it's useless to you until I've built the case. Anna's jaw set. Which means the box alone isn't enough. You need me to have finished the work and I haven't, and there's no time. For one terrible second, the whole thing teetered the proof in her hands, worthless as scribbles. The case unbuilt, the men 20 minutes out becoming 15. And then Dorothy Wells spoke from the doorway, and her ruined voice was steady as stone. You don't need the case built, child. You need the witness who can build it somewhere they can't burn her. The old woman came forward. Send me. With the box. I wrote the cipher. I can read it in my sleep. I match it to the bank records. Doyle turns over, and I build the case myself in the Capitol, in a room full of federal men while you two hold the ranch. They're not coming here for me anymore. They're coming here for the box. So the box leaves, and I leave with it. And everything they came to burn is 3 miles gone before they ever kick your door. The yard went silent for one heartbeat. Dorothy, Anna started. You can barely... I walked 6 miles in the dark 2 nights ago to hand you 1 page. Dorothy's clouded eyes found Anna's face with terrible accuracy. Don't you dare tell me an old blind woman can't ride 3 miles to hand a court 11 years. She reached out and gripped Anna's wrist one last time. I've been nothing for 11 years, child. Let me be the thing that ends her. Let an old coward have the last brave thing. And Anna Cole, with the horses growing louder on the road, did the hardest arithmetic of her life, and knew Dorothy was right. Go, she said. Both of you. Take Dorothy. Take the box, ride the backtrack north, and don't look behind you. She pressed the box into Hale's hands and helped Dorothy toward the horses. And Sturgis was already mounting, and Ruth was leading the good horses around toward the rear of the ranch where the cross-country track began. When you get there, you tell them everything. You tell them about my father. You tell them about the letter he wrote. You tell them he died for this, and you make them listen. I'll make them listen, Dorothy said, as Hale lifted her onto the horse behind him, like she weighed nothing at all. You have my word. And Anna... She paused, and for one moment the iron cracked, and something soft came through. Your father would be proud of the woman his letter made. Now go hold your ground, and don't you dare die before I'm back to see how it ended. They rode out the back as the sound of the 3 horses reached the mouth of the main road, and Anna Cole turned to face the front of her ranch with nothing left to protect but the ground itself and the man standing on it. They're going to search the house, Ethan said low, checking the rifle. When they don't find it, they'll burn the ranch to make sure. And when they ride back to her empty-handed, and it turns out the box is already in the Capitol, she'll know she lost this morning. He glanced at her. But that's after. Right now there's 3 of them and 2 of us, and I need you inside, Anna. Please. I can't fight them and watch you both. I'm not going inside. Anna picked up the second rifle from beside the door, Ethan's spare, the one he'd taught her to load 2 nights back, sitting at the kitchen table because honesty over emotion and work over promises meant a wife who could shoot. Partnership over dependency. Your rule. My rule. I'm not hiding in a cellar while you die in the yard for both of us. She worked the action the way he'd shown her. We stand where they can see us, both of us. Isn't that what you said to me? Ethan looked at his wife for one long second. This woman who'd pounded on his door, half frozen, 3 weeks ago, with a dead man's letter, who'd built a case against the most dangerous person in the territory at his kitchen table in the middle of the night, who was now standing beside him with a rifle in her hands and no fear left in her face because Evelyn Crow had already taken everything there was to be afraid of losing. And Ethan Cole, who had not loved anyone in 15 years. Because loving people was how they got taken from you, understood in that moment that he loved her, and that it was the worst possible time to know it, and that he was going to fight like hell to make sure they both lived long enough for it to matter. That's what I said, he answered. God help me, that's what I said. The 3 riders came up the road and into the yard, and they were not subtle men, and they were not there to talk. They fanned out the way men do who've done this before, and the one in the center bigger than the others, a scar down one cheek. The kind of man Evelyn Crow kept. For exactly, this took one look at Ethan Cole, standing his ground with a rifle and a woman beside him, and laughed. Cole, he said. Been a while. You're looking about as poor and stupid as I remember." He swung down off his horse, unhurried, sure of the numbers. "We're here for a box. Old woman's records. You hand it over, and maybe the fire only takes the barn instead of the house. You make it hard and well." He glanced at Anna and smiled in a way that made Ethan's finger tighten on the trigger. "It gets harder for everybody." "There's no box here," Ethan said. "That's so. Search the house. Search the barn. Search the whole ranch." Ethan's voice was steady as bedrock. "You won't find a thing, because whatever you came for left 20 minutes ago, and it's riding for the Capitol with a federal examiner, and by tonight, there's going to be a room full of men who don't owe Evelyn Crow a nickel reading 11 years of her ghosts out loud." He let that land. "You're not here to stop anything, boys. You're too late to stop it. You're just here to add 3 more names to the list of things she's going to hang for." The scarred man's smile flickered. He hadn't been told about a federal examiner. Evelyn Crow had sent him to burn a ranch and frighten a bookkeeper. She had not in her scared reaching thought to tell her hired men that the war might already be lost, because a scared person moves too fast and reaches too far and forgets to tell the reaching hand what it's reaching into. "He's bluffing," said one of the others, but his voice wasn't sure. "Am I?" Ethan didn't move. "You rode past a poor widow on a mule this morning, didn't you? On the main road. In the gray. You didn't even look at her twice because nobody ever looks at a poor woman twice. That's the whole trick your boss has run for 20 years, ignoring the people beneath her notice." His eyes were cold. "That woman beat you here by 20 minutes. And the box you rode all this way to burn went out the back of my ranch before you cleared the top of the road. So go ahead. Search. Burn it all down. And when you ride back to Evelyn Crow with ash on your hands and nothing in them, you tell her. Ethan Cole says the mistake she left standing 11 years ago just rode into the Capitol to bury her." For one long taut second, nobody moved. And then the scarred man made the choice that scared men's hired hands make when the ground shifts under them. He reached for his gun because it was the only thing he knew how to do. And Ethan Cole, who had seen it coming in the man's shoulders a half-second before, his hand moved, fired first. What happened next happened fast and ugly and close, the way real violence does with none of the grandeur the stories give it. The scarred man went down. One of the others got a shot off that splintered the doorframe by Anna's head, and Anna, who had never fired at a living man in her life, who was a bookkeeper who solved things with columns and not bullets, raised Ethan's spare rifle and fired at the man trying to kill her husband, and hit his horse, which reared and threw him hard into the dirt. The third man looked at his fallen companions, and at the scarred body in the yard, and at the scarred rancher and the bookkeeper, who were both impossibly still standing and still armed, and he did the arithmetic of his own survival, and came up with the only answer that let him keep breathing. He ran. He got on his horse and he rode, and he did not look back, and Ethan let him go, because a man riding, scared back to Evelyn Crow, with the news that it had all gone wrong, was worth more alive than dead. Then it was quiet. Anna stood in the ringing silence with the rifle still up, and her hands shaking now that it was over, and Ethan crossed the yard to her and gently pushed the barrel down toward the ground and took her face in his hands. "You're all right," he said. It was half a question. "I'm all right." She was breathing hard. "I'm all right." He didn't let go of her face. "You shot a man's horse out from under him. You, a bookkeeper." "He was trying to kill you," Anna said, and her voice cracked, and the whole terrible morning caught up with her all at once. "He was trying to kill you, and I wasn't going to just... I know." Ethan pulled her against him and held her in the middle of the yard in the gray dawn, with a dead man behind them and the war not yet over. And for the first time since she'd pounded on his door 3 weeks ago, Anna Cole let herself be held without holding anything back. "I know. I've got you. It's all right. I've got you." They didn't kiss. There wasn't time, and it wasn't the moment, and neither of them was ready to say the thing out loud. But it was there in the yard with them, real as the smoke, real as the fear, real as the ground they'd refused to run from. 60 miles away, by the time the sun was fully up, Everett Hale and Dorothy Wells and Sturgis were riding hard down the north road with a box that could hang the richest woman in the territory. And Dorothy, who could not see the road, who was 71 years old, who had been nothing for 11 years, held that box against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her alive, and read the cipher in her head as they rode building the case out loud to a federal examiner who listened and understood, and grew mile by mile more certain that he was carrying the end of Evelyn Crow out of the county on the back of a good horse. They reached the capital that night. And what Evelyn Crow had built over 20 years took 4 days to fall. It fell the way Anna had always said it would not, with a gunfight, not with a fire, but with 3 sets of books laid side by side on a table in a room Evelyn Crow had never bought her way into. Dorothy Wells sat at that table for 2 days straight, and she read her cipher aloud, entry by entry, 11 years of ghost vendors, and Everett Hale laid Doyle's bank records beside them, and Ethan's 15 years of receipts beside those, and the 3 of them told the same story in 3 different hands, and it was exactly as Anna had promised, a story no bought judge on earth could call a coincidence. A payment made. No goods delivered. Money into a box Evelyn Crow controlled. 100 times. 1,000 times. 20 years of it in triplicate, undeniable. And then the thing happened that Anna had promised would happen. The thing that broke the Empire's back for good, the moment a federal court began asking questions. Evelyn Crow couldn't buy her way out of the people, started talking. Francis Doyle had already talked. Now the mill owner talked, and the mercantile owner talked, and one by one every business owner in Wolf Creek who'd spent 20 years drowning alone and blaming himself looked up and realized he had not been drowning alone at all, that the same hand had been holding all of them under, and they came forward one after another, each one braver, because the last one had done it first, until the whispers Everett Hale could never use in a court became a flood of sworn testimony no court could ignore. Evelyn Crow was arrested in her fine house on the 5th day. They came for her the way she had come for so many others, quietly, politely in the daylight with papers. And Evelyn Crow, who had built an empire on never being the scared one, stood in her own front room and understood at last that she had reached too far, that the mistake she'd left standing had ridden into the Capitol and buried her, that the whole thing had come apart, not because someone was stronger than her, but because someone had refused to be afraid. They never proved she killed Thomas Bennett. Anna had known they wouldn't from the start. A healthy man's sudden heart 4 weeks after crossing her. There was no ledger for that. No cipher. No witness. But it didn't matter in the end, and Anna understood why it didn't matter the day the marshals rode out to tell her Evelyn Crow would spend the rest of her life in a federal prison for the fraud. Because her father hadn't asked to be avenged. Her father had asked to be answered. He'd made his own death into a question that didn't add up, and the answer was never going to be a murder charge. The answer was the thing itself. The empire broken, the county free. The silence ended, the woman who'd stolen 20 years of other people's lives sitting in a cell while the people she'd robbed walked into the daylight and stopped being afraid. Thomas Bennett had asked for the truth to survive, and it had. Francis Doyle was not prosecuted. Everett Hale saw to that. A man who breaks free and hands you the empire earns something for it. And Doyle spent the rest of his days a smaller, quieter man, who'd finally learned that one confessed mistake weighs nothing against 11 years of being owned. Dorothy Wells came home from the Capitol a different woman than the one who'd left. Not nothing anymore, never nothing again, but the witness who ended Evelyn Crow, and the town that had ignored her for 11 years, learned her name and never forgot it. Ruth Tanner. The poor widow nobody ever watched was given a place on the Cole Ranch for as long as she wanted it because Anna Cole understood better than anyone alive that the people beneath notice are the ones who save you, and she would never again let one of them go unseen. The bank cleared Ethan's note. It had been built on Evelyn Crow's fraud from the start. 20 years of a man being robbed and calling it his own failure. And when the court unwound her holdings, the ranch that had never quite lived and never quite died, finally, at last, came free. Ethan Cole stopped being the story the town told. So did Anna. They stood together on the porch of their ranch. The evening it was all finally over, the marshals gone, the papers signed, the note, cleared the war won, And Ethan, who had held a rifle on her the first night and married her at a table over a handshake, and fought 3 men in his own yard rather than let her be taken. Finally said the thing he'd been carrying since the morning of the horses. "Ask me that again," he said. Anna looked at him. "Ask you what? Why I really did it. All of it. You asked me that first day riding home from the church, and I gave you an answer about being done being a coward. It was true. But it wasn't all of it." He turned to face her fully. "I didn't know the rest of it yet that day. I know it now." Anna's breath caught. "I did it because your father sent me the one person in the world who was as done running as I was," Ethan said. "And somewhere between the ledgers and the fire and the worst morning of my life, the marriage of survival stopped being about survival." His voice was rough and certain. "I'm not asking you to love me, Anna. That was the deal. I said it at the table. No love, just sense. But the deal's finished. The war's won. So I'm not standing here as the deal anymore. I'm standing here as a man asking his wife if she'd stay married to him for a reason that has nothing to do with a lever or a note or a dead man's letter." He took her hands. "Stay because you want to. That's all I'm asking. Stay because you want to." And Anna Cole, who had learned a long time ago that feeling could not touch the arithmetic, who had built her whole survival on keeping the columns separate from the heart, looked at the man in front of her, and finally, for the first time in her life, let the two things be the same. "My father didn't send me a husband," she said. "You told me that yourself. I said it that night, and you didn't argue. He sent me an ally, someone to fight beside." Her voice was steady now, steadier than it had ever been. "But somewhere between the fight and the fire, you stopped being the ally, Ethan Cole. And I stopped keeping the columns separate." She stepped into him. "So yes, I'll stay. Not because of the deal, and not because of my father, and not because of the lever or the note or any of it. I'll stay because I want to. That's the whole reason. That's the only reason left." And this time on the porch of the ranch that was finally fully theirs, with the whole long war behind them, and the county free, and the silence broken forever. They kissed, not as a forced marriage, not as a bargain, not as survival, but as two people who had walked into the same fire from opposite sides, and come out the other end, belonging at last to something they had chosen. Thomas Bennett had written a dying letter, asking a scarred, mistrusted man to protect his daughter. He had gotten far more than he'd asked for. He had gotten the truth surviving the empire falling, the county freed, and a life rebuilt from something stronger than obligation. A life built on trust, chosen freely by two people who refused to run. The father's desperate letter had asked for an answer. And standing on that porch in each other's arms, with everything won and nothing left to fear, Anna and Ethan Cole had become it. Viết lại phần hook mở đầu của kịch bản này cực mạnh. Mở đầu bằng một câu thoại cực mạnh bộc lộ ngay hành động cảm xúc định, ngay lập tức tiết lộ xung đột với tiêu đề không dẫn dắt không giới thiệu. Dài 90 đến 110 từ, then you must be my answer. He said it with a rifle still raised between them, and Anna Bennett nearly broke. "Don't!" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't be kind to me. Every kind man in this town sold me to Evelyn Crow for the price of her smile. My father is 4 weeks in the ground, and he sent me to you because he knew what she'd do next. So if you're going to point that gun, point it. But don't you dare smile at me like I'm worth saving." Ethan Cole lowered the rifle. "Your father was the only man who ever believed I wasn't a monster. I intend to prove him right. If you're watching, subscribe and follow this story to the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. The ride to the Capitol nearly killed Dorothy Wells, and she never once said so." Everett Hale felt her arms loosen around his waist, somewhere in the second hour past the North Road, when the sun had climbed high enough to burn the fear off, but not the exhaustion. And he reined in hard, and reached back, and caught the old woman before she slid off the horse. "Mrs. Wells. Dorothy. Stay with me. I'm here." Her voice was thin as paper. "I'm here. I just closed my eyes. A blind woman's allowed to close her eyes, isn't she?" A dry sound that might have been a laugh. "Don't stop for me, Mr. Hale. Whatever you do, don't stop. That box has to reach a courthouse before that woman's third rider gets back to her and tells her it's already gone. The minute she knows she's lost, she runs. And a woman like Evelyn Crow has money hidden in 6 territories. If she runs, we lose her forever, and every soul she ever robbed goes on believing it was their own fault till the day they die. She tightened her grip. So ride. I'll fall off before I let you stop. Hale rode. Sturgis pulled alongside his own horse Lathered. She can't take the whole distance at this pace. She'll take it? Hale didn't slow. You heard her. She's been waiting 11 years for this ride. She's not going to die 3 miles short of it. And Dorothy Wells, 71 years old and blind and holding 11 years of another woman's crimes against her chest, pressed her face against the back of a federal examiner's coat and rode into the one place on earth Evelyn Crow had never been able to buy. They reached the Capitol as the lamps were being lit. Hale did not take her to an inn. He did not take her to rest. He took her straight to the territorial courthouse, to the office of a judge named Pruitt, a hard old man with a reputation for 2 things, an incorruptible temper and a hatred of anyone who thought money could reach him. Hale had chosen him weeks ago on the strength of a single story that Pruitt had once thrown a railroad lawyer out of his chambers for the crime of leaving an envelope on his desk, and had made the man pick it up off the floor in front of witnesses before he threw him out a second time. Pruitt looked up when Hale carried the old woman in. Everett, it's near 10 o'clock. What in God's name? Your Honor. Hale set Dorothy carefully into a chair. This is Dorothy Wells. She's ridden 60 miles today blind on the back of my horse carrying evidence in a fraud case I've been building for 6 months. 3 men tried to burn her out of existence at dawn. She got out 20 minutes ahead of them. He set the box on Pruitt's desk. She can read what's inside this box. Nobody else on earth can. And I need you to hear her before she sleeps, because she is 71 years old and she has been running on nothing but spite since sunup, and I am afraid, Your Honor, that if she sleeps before she starts, she may not wake up in time to finish. Judge Pruitt looked at the exhausted old woman in the chair, and then at the box, and then at Everett Hale, and something in his hard face shifted. Mrs. Wells, he said. Can you speak? Dorothy lifted her head. I've been quiet for 11 years, Your Honor, she said. You'd have to fight me to make me quiet again. Pruitt almost smiled. Then talk, he said, and he sat down, and he did not leave that chair for the next 2 days. What Dorothy Wells did over those 2 days, Everett Hale would describe for the rest of his life as the single most extraordinary thing he ever watched a human being do. She could not see this box. She did not need to. She had written every mark in it herself, in a cipher of her own making, and 11 years of another woman's crimes lived behind her ruined eyes as clearly as they lived on the page. Hale would lift a leaf of paper from the box and read her the date and the marks, and Dorothy Wells would close her eyes and translate this vendor, this amount, this box. It went into this good. It was never delivered. And Hale would lay Doyle's bank records beside it. And there it would be the same date, the same amount. The money leaving the bank exactly as Dorothy said it had, vanishing into exactly the place Dorothy said it went. And then, because Anna had thought of everything, Hale would lay Ethan Cole's receipts beside those. And the third witness would confirm what the first 2 had sworn the vendor Evelyn Crow had paid, had never in 15 years delivered so much as a single sack of feed to the ranch that paid for it. A payment made, Pruitt said quietly on the first day, watching the 3 sets of books agree for the 10th time. No goods delivered. Money into a box she controlled. 100 times, Your Honor, Dorothy said, eyes closed. I've got 100 more where that came from. Shall I keep going? Keep going, said Judge Pruitt. She kept going. By the end of the first day, she had built 40 airtight cases. Each one small. Each one undeniable. Each one a single stone in a wall that was rising higher than any bought judge could ever tear down. By the end of the second, she had built over 100, and Everett Hale had watched a hard old judge go slowly white with the scale of it, because it was one thing to suspect a woman was a thief, and another thing entirely to watch hour after hour the exact machinery of 20 years of theft laid bare by a blind woman who could not stop. "How did you carry this?" Pruitt asked her near the end of the second day. His voice had lost all its hardness. 11 years. Knowing all of it. In your own head. How did you carry it and say nothing? Dorothy Wells was quiet for a moment. "I told myself I was being wise," she said. "I told myself a person can't fight a thing that big, so the smart thing is to survive it. I called my silence wisdom for 11 years, Your Honor." Her clouded eyes turned toward the sound of his voice. "And then a man named Thomas Bennett, who was no braver than me and no stronger than me, walked to that woman's door with nothing but the truth and got himself killed for it. And I finally understood the difference between us. He wasn't wiser than me. He was just less of a coward." Her voice cracked. "So when his daughter knocked on my door, I decided I'd rather die brave than keep on living wise. That's how I carried it, Your Honor. Badly. For 11 years. And then all at once I stopped." Judge Pruitt looked at the old woman for a long moment. "Thomas Bennett," he said slowly. "The unsigned letter. 6 months ago." Hale nodded. "We believe he wrote it, before he died. To protect his daughter, he never signed his name." Pruitt was silent. Then he stood, and he came around his desk, and he did a thing no one who knew him would have believed. He took Dorothy Wells's gnarled old hand in both of his, and he bowed his head over it. "Then you tell me when you're ready, Mrs. Wells," he said, "and I will sign the order for that woman's arrest myself. Tonight, if you like. But not until you've slept. You've done enough for 3 lifetimes in 2 days. The wall's built. She's not getting over it. Rest now." Dorothy Wells finally at last allowed herself to rest. 60 miles away, Anna and Ethan did not rest at all. They buried the scarred man at the edge of the property in ground. Nobody would ever question, because a body in a ranch yard was a story Evelyn Crow could still use even now, and Anna had learned to think 3 moves ahead of a woman who thought in 20s of years. Sheriff Barrett came out and made it official self-defense. 3 armed men, a burned barn testimony from Ruth Tanner, who'd seen the cans and the rope, and Barrett, who had spent his whole career carefully not seeing the things Evelyn Crow did, seemed almost relieved to finally be allowed to see them. "I knew," he admitted to Ethan standing in the yard where the fight had happened. "Not all of it, but I knew enough to know I didn't want to know the rest. That's the coward's version of ignorance, Cole. You decide not to look." He shook his head. "Doyle broke, and I found myself glad. That's when I knew how long I'd been carrying it. You're glad when the thing you were too scared to fight starts falling on its own." "It's not falling on its own," Anna said quietly, coming out onto the porch. "Nothing about this fell on its own. My father died to start it. Dorothy nearly died to carry it. Ruth rode a mule half to death to warn us. Everybody who ever helped paid for it in blood or fear." Her voice was steady. "The only thing that fell on its own was the lie, and it only fell because enough people finally decided to stop holding it up. That was the waiting, the terrible, endless waiting 4 days of it, with the box gone north and no word coming back." Anna could not build the case anymore, because the case had left with Dorothy. She could not fight, because there was nothing left in the yard to fight. She could only wait, and waiting was the one thing Anna Bennett had never been able to do. She'd learned patience for 1 week to protect Dorothy's records. Now she had to learn it again for 4 days that felt like 4 years, not knowing if Hale had reached the capital, not knowing if Dorothy had survived the ride, not knowing if Evelyn Crow's 3rd rider had reached her in time for her to run. She could be gone already, Anna said on the second night, unable to sleep sitting at the table where she'd built so much of the case. She could be 3 territories away by now with a new name and half her money, and we'd never know until it was too late. She could be. Ethan sat across from her the way he had that first night. Or she could be sitting in her fine house right now, too proud to run, because a woman who's never lost in 20 years doesn't believe she can lose. Pride's a kind of blindness too, Anna. Yours isn't the only kind in this story. Anna looked at him. You think she'll stay? I think a person who's built her whole life on never being afraid can't run the second she gets afraid, because running means admitting the fear is real. Ethan turned his coffee cup a slow half-circle on the table, the way he had that first night, and Anna felt the whole story bend back on itself. I think Evelyn Crow is sitting in that house right now telling herself it's not over, that she's beaten harder cases than a blind pauper and a bookkeeper, that she still has judges and money and time. He set the cup down. And I think that's exactly the mistake that's going to cost her everything. Because we didn't take her case to a judge she owns. We took it past all of them. And by the time she understands the ground's already gone from under her, the marshals will be at her door. He was right. Because Evelyn Crow did not run. She sat in her fine house exactly as Ethan had said, and she did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic told her she was losing. But 20 years of never losing had built a wall in her own mind higher than any Dorothy Wells could build. And behind that wall, Evelyn Crow simply could not believe it. She had bought judges. She had broken bookkeepers. She had ended a healthy man's life with a word to the right person and watched them call it his heart. She had spent 2 decades proving that there was no one anywhere she could not reach. And so when her third rider finally reached her hours late, having ridden the long way around to avoid the roads, and told her white-faced that it had all gone wrong, that Cole had killed one man, and the bookkeeper had put another in the dirt, and the box was already gone north with a federal examiner. Evelyn Crow did not run. She poured herself a drink exactly as Frances Doyle had done, and she sat down, and for the first time in 20 years, she felt the specific, unfamiliar cold of being the scared one. Then she reached for paper and ink as she always did. But there was no one left to write to. That was the thing she understood slowly, sitting alone with the pen in her hand. Doyle had broken. The judges she could reach were 3 days' ride away, and useless against a federal court. The men she paid to make problems disappear had just tried to make the Cole Ranch disappear, and come back with 1 dead and 1 fled and nothing to show. The whole machine she'd built, the web, the leash, the empire of frightened people all believing they were alone, had run on one thing and one thing only: the certainty that no one would ever stand up, because standing up meant dying alone, the way Thomas Bennett had died alone. And now 3 ruined people had stood up together and shown the whole county that no one who stood with them stood alone anymore, and the machine had nothing left to run on. Evelyn Crow set down the pen. She was still sitting there 3 days later when the marshals came. They came exactly the way she had come for so many others, quietly, politely in the daylight with papers. There was no drama to it, and that was the cruelest thing of all, because Evelyn Crow had built a life on drama, on the theater of ruin, on standing in the middle of a mercantile and destroying a girl with a single sentence. And her own ending had none of it. Just a marshal at her door, with an order signed by a judge she'd never been able to buy, reading her the charges in a flat official voice, 20 years of theft laid out in numbered counts, each one built from 3 sets of books that agreed. On what evidence? She said. It was the only thing she said, and she said it out of pure instinct, the reflex of a woman who had always had an answer. On the sworn account of Mrs. Dorothy Wells. The marshal said, cross-referenced against the bank records of Mr. Francis Doyle and the private receipts of Mr. Ethan Cole. 3 independent sources, ma'am. Judge Pruitt reviewed all of it personally. He said to tell you, the marshal glanced at a note. He said to tell you it took 11 years for someone to write it all down, and 2 days for it to convict you, and that he's rarely seen anything so thorough in his life. Dorothy Wells. Evelyn Crow closed her eyes. The mistake she had left standing. The blind old pauper she'd let live, because a nothing was no threat. 11 years ago, she'd made a single decision to push the woman out quietly instead of ending her, because ending a longtime bookkeeper drew eyes, and pushing one out drew none, and that single decision, that one mistake left standing out of 20 careful years, had ridden 60 miles on the back of a federal horse and buried her. She had built an entire empire on one iron principle: you never ever leave a mistake standing. She had broken her own only rule exactly once. Once had been enough. They took Evelyn Crow out of her fine house in the daylight, and the town of Wolf Creek came out to watch, and Anna Cole watched too from the boardwalk, in the same spot where Evelyn Crow had once stood at the bottom of the church steps and called her a thief who saw things that weren't there. Evelyn Crow saw her. For one long moment across the street, the two women looked at each other. The richest woman in the territory in irons, and the ruined bookkeeper who had refused to stay ruined. And Evelyn Crow did the thing Anna would think about for the rest of her life. She did not sneer. She did not threaten. She did not summon one last cutting sentence from the arsenal that had destroyed 100 people. She simply looked at Anna Bennett with an expression Anna had seen exactly once before on the church steps, the day Anna had said, "You know exactly what I found," and the smile had slipped for half a second. Fear. And under the fear at long last, something almost like understanding. "Your father," Evelyn Crow said. Her voice carried clear across the silent street. "He sat in my parlor and told me he knew what I was. I told him no one would ever believe him. I told him he was a foolish old man and he'd do well to think of his daughter." Her chin lifted. "He said something to me that day. I've thought about it more than I care to admit. He said, 'Mrs. Crow, you've spent 20 years making sure everyone you rob believes they're alone. But the day two of them find each other, your whole world ends. And I intend to make sure my daughter is never alone again.'" Evelyn Crow's mouth twisted. "I killed him for it, and it turns out he was right anyway." She let them lead her to the wagon, and at the last she looked back at Anna one final time. "He won," Evelyn Crow said. "Your father won. Tell yourself that when you think of him. Tell yourself the old man beat me from his grave with nothing but a letter and a girl." And then, so quietly, that only Anna caught it. "I've never in my life been beaten by someone who wasn't afraid. I didn't know it could be done." They drove her away, and Anna Cole stood on the boardwalk in the spot where she'd once been destroyed, and understood that she had just heard the closest thing to a confession Evelyn Crow would ever give the admission in front of the whole town that Thomas Bennett had died for exactly the reason Anna had always known, and that his death had not been in vain. She did not cry. She had done her crying. She stood very straight the way Ethan had taught her that first day riding into town. They can only take from you what you agree to be ashamed of. And she watched the wagon carry Evelyn Crow out of Wolf Creek and out of all their lives. And she felt for the first time since her father's letter that the accounts were finally fully balanced. Ethan found her there. "It's done," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "It's done." Anna kept her eyes on the road where the wagon had vanished. She admitted it, right there in front of everyone. Not the murder, they'll never prove the murder, I always knew that. But she admitted why he died. She said his name. She said he won. Anna's voice was steady. "That's more than I ever thought I'd get, Ethan. I came here 3 weeks ago, wanting revenge, wanting her to pay for my father, and I've learned something standing on this boardwalk." She finally turned to him. "I don't want revenge anymore. Revenge is what she'd want if she were me. Revenge is her whole language. What I wanted, what my father wanted, was for the truth to survive. And it did. That's not revenge. That's justice. And it turns out they don't feel the same at all." Ethan looked at his wife for a long moment. "Your father would be proud of you," he said. "I know you told me not to say it until you were still standing." He glanced down the empty street. "You're still standing." And this time, Anna Cole let herself hear it. Dorothy Wells came home from the capital a week later, and the whole town turned out for her, the same town that had ignored her for 11 years, calling her a blind old pauper stepping around her in the street. Now they lined the boardwalk to see the woman who had ended Evelyn Crow, and Dorothy, riding in beside Everett Hale, could not see a single one of them. But she could hear them, and she turned her clouded eyes toward the sound of a whole town saying her name, and something 11 years broken finally healed in her ruined face. "They're saying my name," she said to Hale wonderingly. "I've lived in this town for 40 years, and I don't think it ever once said my name until today." "It'll never stop now," Hale said. "You've made sure of that." Anna and Ethan were waiting at the ranch when Hale brought her the last of the way, and Anna helped the old woman down from the horse and held her, and Dorothy gripped her the way she always did with that surprising iron strength. "You built the whole thing," Anna said into her shoulder. 2 days, from memory, blind. You built the whole case. You built it, child. I just read it out loud." Dorothy pulled back, and her hands found Anna's face, mapping it with gnarled fingers the way the blind do. "You're smiling. I can feel it. First time since you came to my door that I've felt you smile." Her voice cracked. "Your father made you fierce, but you didn't come to me fierce and smiling both. You found the second half somewhere in these 3 weeks." Her fingers moved to where Ethan stood beside them. "It's this one, isn't it? The monster who turned out to be the only honest man in the county." Anna started coloring. "Don't Dorothy me. I'm blind, not stupid. I heard how he said your name on the ride to my house that first day, and I hear how you're breathing right now standing next to him." The old woman cackled. "Your father asked him to marry you for protection. Well, he protected you, and it seems he did a few other things besides." She patted Anna's cheek. "Good. You deserve it. God knows you both deserve it. 2 people the whole world called liars finding out the only person who never lied to them was each other." They settled Dorothy into the small room off the kitchen permanently now, because Anna would not hear of her going back to that poor house, and Dorothy, who had spent 11 years alone, did not fight very hard. That night, the ranch was fuller than it had been in 15 years. Dorothy sleeping soundly in the small room. Ruth Tanner in the new room they'd built for her, the poor widow who'd saved them all, no longer poor and never again forgotten. Everett Hale bedded down in the barn they were already rebuilding, headed back to the capital in the morning with the last of the paperwork. And Anna and Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, where the whole thing had begun, in the low lamplight, with the war finally fully over. "Can I ask you something?" Anna said. "You can ask me anything. That was the rule. Honesty over emotion. That rule." Anna turned her own coffee cup a slow half-circle, unconsciously mirroring the gesture he'd made 100 times. Honesty over emotion. Work over promises. Partnership over dependency. I made those rules that first night because they were the only things I had left to hold on to. I was so afraid of owing anyone. So afraid of being kept, being dependent, being small. She looked up. "But somewhere in the last 3 weeks, the rules changed on me, Ethan. And I don't know when it happened. Honesty over emotion, except now the honest thing and the emotional thing are the same thing. Work over promises, except you've kept every promise you never even made me. Partnership over dependency." Her voice caught. "Except I've never depended on anyone in my life the way I've come to depend on you, and it doesn't feel small at all. It feels like the opposite of small." Ethan was quiet. "I made those rules to protect myself from you," Anna said. "And you kept every one of them, and it made me trust you, and trusting you undid every reason I had for the rules in the first place." She laughed unsteady. "I've been trying to balance the columns for 3 weeks. Keep the feeling separate from the arithmetic. And I can't do it anymore. The columns won't stay separate. Every time I add it up, it comes out the same." "Comes out how?" Ethan said, very quietly. Anna looked at him across the table in the lamplight in the house that was finally theirs. "Comes out that I love you," she said. "That's the number at the bottom of every column, Ethan. I've checked it 100 times. It doesn't change." Her eyes were bright. "You asked me on the porch to stay because I wanted to. I said yes, and I meant it, but I don't think I said the whole of it because I was still trying to keep one column separate. So here's the whole of it, honest, the way we agreed. I don't just want to stay. I love you. My father sent me an ally, and I fell in love with him somewhere between the ledgers and the fire, and I'm done keeping it in its own column." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. Not as a deal, not as a handshake the way he had that first sleepless night, but the way a man takes the hand of the one thing in the world he means to keep. "You know I'm no good at saying things," he said rough. 15 years alone doesn't teach a man to talk. But I'll say this one plain, so there's no mistake in the ledger." He held her eyes. "I stopped being able to imagine this ranch without you in it about 2 days after you got here. I told myself it was the fight. Then I told myself it was your father's debt. Then 3 men rode into my yard and I found out the truth of it, that the thing I was really fighting for wasn't the land, and it wasn't the case, and it wasn't even justice for your father. It was you. It's been you since about the second morning." He drew a breath. I love you, Anna Cole. Not the deal. Not the lever. You. I have for a while. I'm just slow at saying it. Anna came around the table and into his arms, and this time there was no war to fight and no case to build, and no fear left to hold anything back. And they held each other in the lamplight of the house they'd saved 2 people. The whole world had called liars, finding out at last that the only person who'd never lied to either of them was each other. Outside the ranch that had never quite lived and never quite died, settled into the dark free at last of the woman who'd bled it for 20 years. Dorothy Wells slept the deep sleep of a coward who'd finally been brave. Ruth Tanner slept in a bed she'd never have to fear losing. And down the road toward Wolf Creek, the biggest house in the county, sat dark and empty for the first time in 2 decades. Its owner in a federal cell, its empire scattered back to the people she'd stolen it from, one honest dollar at a time. Thomas Bennett had written a dying letter asking a scarred, mistrusted man to protect his daughter. He had gotten so much more than he asked for. He had gotten the truth surviving, the empire falling, the county freed, a whole town learning to say a forgotten woman's name, and a daughter who had walked into the coldest fire of her life and come out the other side not just protected, but loved, belonging at last to a life she had chosen with her own 2 hands built on the one thing Evelyn Crow had never understood and could never steal: trust freely given, between 2 people who had refused together to be afraid. The father's letter had asked a question. And in that warm and crowded house, with everything won and nothing left to fear, Anna and Ethan Cole had become the answer to it completely, permanently, and for the rest of their lives.